Rome, the Circus Maximus in the heart of the Eternal City. In the times of ancient Rome, chariot races were taking place here, and other mass entertainment. Part of it were persecutions of Christians in the 1st century AD. It is very symbolic that exactly here, more than 1 million people from all over Italy have gathered on 30th of January 2016 to protest against the legalization of the so-called same-sex unions, gay adoptions and surrogate motherhood. Because today this is the front line of attack against Christianity and the natural God-established order of things. Here, in the Roman Colosseum 2000 years ago, Christians were sacrificed. Throughout the Roman Empire, there were severe persecutions of Christians. They were forced to hide in the underground catacombs and there perform liturgies. These catacombs have survived and are now tourist attractions. Today, 2000 years later, a similar situation is coming back. Wrongfully understood human rights, tolerance and political correctness are used by a very powerful gay lobby to impose this unhealthy lifestyle as a new norm. At the same time, church and family values are being pushed out of the mainstream and to the margins of society. Today, we see a new wave of persecutions of Christians. Christians are considered unwanted members of society, and we see again, unfortunately, in modern Europe, a repetition of what was at the beginning of the Roman Empire. Will Christianity again be a persecuted religion, and will the history repeat itself? Today in the West, we see the emergence of a new kind of totalitarianism. It has softer and more comfortable look, but because of this, it may be even more dangerous. In traditionally Catholic Italy, tens of millions of people do not agree with this, despite all the propaganda of the mainstream liberal mass media.
We are basically fighting for life and family. We publish a magazine, Vademecum, to help the parents to protect their children. We have filled Rome with wall posters. We have lorries going around against gay adoptions and gay weddings, against surrogate motherhood, against the gender. We have also organized last year some 100 conferences, of which about 20 were with Alexei Komov.
Io sono ambasciatore del Congresso Mondiale della Famiglia presso l'ONU, dove noi lottiamo per difendere i valori della famiglia, i valori del cristianesimo, del buon senso.
The World Congress of Families is probably the world's largest network of supporters of the natural family from more than 80 countries.
World Congress of Families represents the advocates, scholars, leaders in business, in government, and activists around the world. We represent a movement of millions of people that believe that the family is the natural and fundamental group unit of society and the only way to achieve a sustainable society.
The idea for the World Congress of Families was born on a cold evening in Moscow, Russia, in 1995. I'd been invited to visit Moscow by several scholars at the Moscow Lomonosov State University. And together we all agreed that it would be a good idea, in fact a grand idea, to try to hold an international meeting to discuss the state of the family, both in the West and in the East. And since then, there have been another 6 World Congress of Families, major international events, and I think we've made a real significant contribution to actualizing that and making it a force in global political and social affairs.
I'm the ambassador of the World Congress of Families at the United Nations. There, we fight to defend traditional family values against constant attempts, aggressive enough, to impose the gender ideology and other unnatural things to the sovereign states of the world. Over the past 2 years, together with Tony Brandi, the head of the largest pro-family organization in Italy called Pro Vita, we have held over 60 conferences in many cities of Italy, the Czech Republic, Slovakia and Hungary. I was always amazed how attentively people listened to our presentations with genuine interest. Considering the background of the issue, we will see that when the World Revolution, which was the dream of Bolsheviks led by Lenin and Trotsky, didn't happen, the Marxists began to analyze what went wrong, and they came to the conclusion that the proletariat had been brainwashed by Christianity and hypocritical, as they said, family values. So, Christianity and traditionally strong patriarchal family needed to be destroyed. In the new historical era, the family and the church have been declared the main enemies. Hence, the most severe persecution of the church during the Soviet era. Of nearly 80,000 churches and 1,250 monasteries that existed in the Russian Empire in 1917, after 20 years of atheistic campaigning, only 100 churches remained open, and not a single monastery. Thousands of new martyrs chose to die for Christ during the 70 years of communism. In place of the demolished Christ the Savior Cathedral, Bolsheviks wanted to build a giant palace of congresses, with the statue of Lenin at the top. But this didn't happen, and they ended up making an open-air swimming pool in this holy place. The USSR was the first country in the world to legalize abortions in 1920. Right after the 1917 revolution, easy divorce was introduced and sodomy decriminalized. Ideas of free love and sexual promiscuity have been strongly promoted by the first revolutionary minister and ambassador to Norway and Sweden, Mrs. Kollontai, and other Soviet public figures. Following the recommendations of Marx and Engels, the family was declared obsolete and oppressive social institution that has no place in the bright communist future. For example, there was a Hungarian Marxist, Georg Lukács, who at the time of the Hungarian Soviet Republic of Bela Kun has introduced for the first time lessons of sexual liberation in schools, in order to destroy the bourgeois and patriarchal foundations of society. He has realized that the easiest way to do it was through the young people and sexuality education at schools. Lukács was the Minister of Education in this country, which existed for a short period of time in 1919 and 20. Therefore, the comprehensive sexuality education, which is now being imposed by the UN and promoted by the International Planned Parenthood, is a direct continuation of those revolutionary experiments of the early 20th century. When I talk about these deep relationships, many conference participants admit that it has opened their eyes, and now they understand the origins of many absurd things that are being imposed on modern Western societies. And this is happening all over the country, in the big cities like Rome, Milan, Naples, Turin, Palermo, and in very small towns such as this, the resort town of Merano, located in the picturesque foothills of the Alps of South Tyrol. But all Italy is very beautiful. Northern mountains, the hills of Tuscany, and southern temper of Calabria and Sicily. This is probably the 5th cycle of our conferences in Italy, and each time we speak in 7 or 8 cities. We have to travel thousands of kilometers, sometimes getting into quite extreme situations. But back to Russia. In late 1930s, this radical revolutionary wave in Russia was over. Instead of pursuing the goal of starting the world revolution, which was Leon Trotsky's position, there came more pragmatic strategy of building socialism in just one isolated country, followed by Joseph Stalin. Advocates of this radical revolutionary line were either purged or forced out of the Soviet Union. Many of them moved to the West and continued to further develop Marxist ideas there. and they have significantly influenced public discourse. Before the Second World War, a more traditionalist line prevailed in the Soviet Union. Abortions have been banned for several years, and persecutions of the church temporarily suspended. And until the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the country remained fairly traditional in terms of the family values, and there was no sex industry. The Iron Curtain has kept the country from the excesses of the sexual revolution that broke out in the West during the turbulent 60s and 70s. The paradox lies in the fact that the ideological basis of this sexual revolution was prepared with ideological help of some ex-Soviet Marxists. A new, powerful Frankfurt school of neo-Marxism has been very influential in 1930s to 1950s. It has been financially supported by some rich people that has been often the case with revolutionaries. As a result of their analysis, they came to the conclusion that in the new historical era, the right strategy should be not to violently seize political control like Bolsheviks in 1917, but rather, using the words of the Italian communist Antonio Gramsci, take the long march through the institutions, meaning take control of the television, cinema, the mass media and universities, and through them transmit their ideas, revolutionizing society. And after this gradual cultural transformation and brainwashing, political power will automatically fall into the hands of those cultural Marxists, thereby ensuring the victory of the world revolution. Sigmund Freud's ideas of pansexualism have been also actively used. Today, TV, Hollywood, major American and European universities are under a very heavy influence of neo-Marxists and neo-Freudians, who have creatively combined those two ideologies in one poisonous cocktail. During the entire 20th century, we've been hearing endless appeals to liberate ourselves, to experiment, to discard old-fashioned prohibitions, and freely use drugs, alcohol, and other substances. And as a result, the universal happiness will arrive, and humanity will return to its golden age. The theorists of the Frankfurt School argued that in the new historical conditions, the bearer of the revolutionary ideology is no longer the proletariat, but rather various minorities, ethnic minorities and immigrants, students, and above all, sexual minorities. That means that instead of a worker from the factory, nowadays the main revolutionary is a homosexual activist. We see that they are being manipulatively used to overthrow the existing social order, and are on the front line of attack. If we look at the world today, it is obvious that the push for the legalization of the so-called same-sex marriage is the nerve of contemporary social politics. The world's largest foundations, such as, for example, the Open Society of George Soros, spend millions of dollars on promotion and lobbying at the UN level of the legalization of abortions, euthanasia, same-sex unions, drugs and prostitution.
Harassing families, and for instance, now our Senate is going to approve the gay marriage and adoption by homosexuals, and they open the door to let the surrogacy in. This is against the children, this is against life, this is against men.
Thanks God, today's Russia has become a strong supporter of traditional moral and family values and defends this position at the UN and other international organizations, as well as at the level of domestic legislation. Here are just a few examples. Introduction of the state financial support in the equivalent of $10,000 for the birth of a second child. Free land plot for the birth of the third child in the family. Ban of abortion propaganda and other laws and measures. The aim is to increase the birth rate, improve demographic situation and strengthen the prestige of the natural family values. While the vast majority of population strongly support those measures, there are of course well-financed minority groups that oppose it. As a result, surrogate motherhood was made legal in Russia. Pussy Riot and feminine radical feminists attack the church and traditional morality. In the last quarter of a century, we're witnessing a miracle, the revival of the church and spirituality after 70 years of Babylonian captivity under communist rule. A bright symbol of this is the restoration of the Christ the Savior Cathedral that had been demolished by the Bolsheviks in 1930s. Over 30,000 churches and 800 monasteries have been recently constructed and opened in Russia. While in some Western capitals, churches are being turned into concert or exhibition halls, now in Moscow, 200 new churches are planned for construction. Many young people, poor and wealthy, regular citizens, and country's leadership regularly go to churches. It is broadcast by the main TV channels and is respectable and prestigious. What a big contrast with the modern West. In 2013, a law banning aggressive propaganda of homosexuality to children has been adopted in Russia. Afterwards, a well-orchestrated international campaign of demonizing Russia and Putin and calling for a boycott of the Sochi Olympic Games have been launched. And it turned out that this issue is more important than economic projects, oil and gas. We see now that family values have become a tool of geopolitics. We now witness a very interesting phenomenon. America and Russia over the past 30 years have reversed their functions in the world. Earlier, the Soviet Union have been supporting the revolutionary and national liberation movements, while conservative America tried to restrain this process. Today, it is conservative Russia who acts as a restraint or katechon, trying to defend traditional moral values and stabilize the situation in the Middle East, after West-inspired color revolutions and the Arab Spring that had actually turned into an anti-Christian winter. So many things in the world have dramatically changed. Sometimes it seems that the world's elites are pursuing religious and occult purposes. Let's take a look, for example, at what toys are offered for children in any modern shop. About half are horrible monsters and vampires for boys, and dolls that look like prostitutes and witches for girls, as if some invisible hand is preparing our children for life in hell, and is in advance familiarizing them with its inhabitants. Decadent content of many movies and TV shows is well known. The most prestigious film and music festivals award the top prizes to the most decadent and pervert movies and artists. And it is necessary to realize that the bulk of the world's largest mass media and film companies are owned by just 5 largest corporations: Walt Disney Company, AOL, Time Warner, Sony, Viacom, Vivendi, Universal. Statistics show that from birth to the age of 17, a child consumes in total more than 63,000 hours of mass media influence, meaning television, cinema and internet. This is 6 times more than the time spent at school, and 30 times more than the time spent communicating thoughtfully with their parents, and 60 times greater than the time spent by young people in the church. So we see that the mass media are in fact the primary educators of the youth. And what are they teaching the new generation? We all know the answer. Orthodox Christians of the former Soviet Union have suffered a lot from the persecutions of the atheistic regime and have gained a valuable experience of resistance to the totalitarian atheistic ideology. Over the 20th century, Western Christians have been putting pressure on the Soviet government in order to prevent complete destruction of the Church in Russia. And our moral duty today is to return the favor and help our brothers and sisters in the West who are now under huge pressure from the new totalitarian ideology and are almost pushed to the margins of society.
I'm very happy to see in Russia, apart from the patriarch, the protection of the family, against abortion. There have been some very strong positions taken. The Russians are fighting, are winning a war for the family, for life, that I wish were the case in our own, in the West here. I wish that we were following, that we could follow the same example in a sense. That they're giving us a good example.
When a frog is thrown into boiling water, it jumps out and stays alive. But when it is put into a cold water and then slowly heated, it dies slowly and quietly. This experiment is being now performed with the former Christian societies. So it is very important that now, at the time of brutal persecutions of Christians in the Middle East and softer persecutions of Christians in modern Europe and America, a meeting of the millennium between Catholic Pope Francis and Russian Patriarch Kirill has taken place. It is noteworthy that the meeting was held under the Orthodox cross and began with the three-time Russian kissing. And the venue was not chosen by chance. Cuba is traditionally in the Russian geopolitical sphere of influence, although it is historically a Catholic country. Joint Declaration proclaims the inviolability of the basic principles of Christianity. It stresses the need for joint struggle against the persecution of Christians in the Middle East.
Both churches have to face the drama of the Christians in the Middle East. They are Syrian, Orthodox, Greeks, Catholic, and they suffer. I'm sure the two churches together could fight to overcome those problems, resolve those problems, instead of being separated.
And protection of the natural family values that are being constantly attacked in the Western world and at the UN and other international institutions. It proclaims the necessity of joint struggle against abortions and euthanasia and proclaims family as the foundation of society. It is also important that this document states that the uniatism is no longer considered to be the desired method of achieving unity between Catholics and Orthodox Christians. This declaration has caused quite a strong reaction among the Ukrainian uniats. Some of them took it as a kind of betrayal of their strategy of converting Orthodox into uniats. But on the other hand, the joint declaration protects uniats and fixes the status quo. Under the onslaught of atheistic liberalism, Western Christians gradually divide into ultra-liberals who in fact cease to be a church and traditionalists who are looking for support in the Orthodox East that is famous for its conservatism. Lux ex oriente is the old Latin phrase meaning light from the East. From the East came the Magi, three wise men. And from the East has the star of Christianity risen. St. Matthew tells in the Gospel that not only the Magi came from the East, but also they saw his, meaning Christ's, star in the East. 3 gifts of the Magi were brought to Russia, Ukraine and Belarus from the Holy Mount Athos during the Christmas season of memorable year 2014. Thanks to the organizer, St. Basil the Great Charity Foundation, millions of people came to venerate those relics. In recent decades, a new meaning has been added to the old expression light from the East. Millions of traditional Catholics from around the world are beginning to see that the revival of Christianity in the West may come from modern Russia, as it has become a real stronghold of traditional religious and family values.
Going back to Russia, La Santa Russia, as we say in Italian, the Holy Russia it's coming back, building churches, defending life, defending the family, defending Christianity.
Western European nations have by and large abdicated that. The United States over the last recent years has abdicated any role of defending the virtues of Christian civilization. Russia has again taken on that role of a defender of what I will call Christian moral values, Christian moral and ethical and sexual principles.
Many Catholics are often citing in this regard the so-called prophecies of Our Lady of Fatima. They were made in the summer of 1917, after the fall of monarchy of Tsar Nicholas II in February, and on the eve of the October Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. In Russia, those prophecies are considered by many as controversial, and some doubt their authenticity. However, in order to understand the enthusiastic attitude of many Catholics towards spiritual revival of Russia, let's consider them in more detail. According to the three Portuguese shepherd girls, Virgin Mary appeared to them 6 times near the Portuguese town of Fatima. On July 13th of 1917, Our Lady has revealed to them the so-called 3 secrets of 3 messages. Here is the text of the prophecies about Russia. If what I tell you will be done, many souls will be saved and there will be peace. The war will end soon. But if people do not cease offending God, the worst war will begin. When you see a night illuminated by an unusual light, know that this is a great sign from God that God is ready to punish the world for crimes by means of war, famine, and persecutions of the Church. To prevent this, I come to ask the consecration of Russia to my Immaculate Heart. If my requests are fulfilled, Russia will convert and there will be peace. If not, she will spread her errors throughout the world, causing wars and persecutions of the Church. In the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. The Holy Father will consecrate Russia to me, and it will convert, and a time of peace will be granted to the world. You can believe it or not, but regardless of the positive or negative attitude, we must admit that the coming in 2017 100th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia and Fatima prophecies in Portugal provoke us to think deeply and to draw some important conclusions. It looks like part of those prophecies about the fall of communism and spiritual revival of Russia came true. After all the suffering and martyrdom that Russia has experienced in the 20th century, today it is perceived by many deeply religious and independently minded people around the world as a hope. And despite unleashed demonization campaign, more and more people begin to realize that the light comes from the East.